In Tech Matters, a new pilot program for a consolidated online FOIA service. 49 years ago this month, the Freedom of Information Act was signed into law. Now the Justice Department will roll out a series of pilot studies to test the feasibility of a release to one, release to all policy. For more, we turn to Alexander B. Howard, Senior Editor for Technology and Society at the Huffington Post. He joins us via Skype from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Alexander, let's talk first about this pilot program. How will it work?
Well, the idea is that they'll have 7 different agencies, or really the components of 7 different agencies, including the ones that receive the greatest number of FOIA requests, that being the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, and several others. And when they release a FOIA response, the records that people have requested, or organizations have requested, businesses have requested, whoever has filed these things, they're saying that they're going to do it to everybody, not just to the individual requester, but they'll actually post it online. Now, this is something that has in fact existed elsewhere. The EPA has been doing something like this since 2013. There's something called FOIA Online, which is a consolidated FOIA service that has existed for some time. But this is a broader set of pilots. And the idea here is basically to look at things that are frequently requested and release them to the entire public. So to kind of create a different kind of disclosure.
Now, President Obama promised to make his administration the most transparent in history, Alexander. Instead, it's setting new records for censorship. What's going on?
Well, it depends what we talk about in terms of transparency. There's lots of different ways to think about open government, and this administration has included different kinds of them. Of course, they've grown up in the age of social media and of big data. So the administration has distinguished itself in the release of data, vast amounts of data, in fact, the data.gov and other contexts. Now, the additional context is the use of participatory platforms as well, things like the We the People e-petition platform, which we've discussed before. Thinking through rulemaking online, we've talked about the avalanche of comments coming in and things like the FCC's comment system. But the other side of the coin is, of course, the accountability and transparency side that we traditionally think about in good government, and that's often best expressed as the things that people ask for that government doesn't want to disclose on its own. And on that count, their record is not as good. In fact, their FOIA compliance rate is, they claim 92%, but in fact, the use of exemptions and redactions under this law is quite high.
Alexander, we're honored to be joined by your 2-year-old daughter. This is important for her generation as well. You know, Congress has failed to pass FOIA reform, a topic we discussed the last time you were on Government Matters. What's the latest?
Well, you see the people who are sponsoring it agitating for it. Senator Leahy, of course, wants it to be taken up in the full Senate. You see Jason Chaffetz, the new chairman of the House Oversight Committee. He's definitely talking about it. He's holding hearings. They're asking for more feedback. But the challenge, of course, is that the interests which diverted it from happening before, of course, we discussed, both houses of Congress unanimously voted for this to be passed, and it didn't get brought up for a vote by the Speaker. Those interests are activated. What's going to have to happen is they'll need to get brought up in this, in the face of activated opposition to them, and then get brought up for a vote. I think it's actually going to be harder under this Congress than would have been the last one. There really was a great opportunity at the end of the 113th Congress. Under this one, it's certainly possible. The need for FOIA reform is no less than it was then.
Let me get back to the idea of consolidated online FOIA service. What are some of the challenges to that concept?
Well, there's been a pilot program which the EPA, as I mentioned earlier, has run. You can look at it under FOIA Online. And that exists with, I think, several different agencies working towards it. You can basically submit a FOIA request through that software, and go on from there. As part of the commitment under the Open Government Partnership, which is this, transnational, international agreement that was started several years ago, and now the U.S. is kind of signed on to in terms of a national action plan. There's supposed to be this way for someone to submit a FOIA request from one place and then direct it to where they want it to go. That is something that 18F, which is the new software shop that exists within the General Services Administration, has built up to a point. It's improved the capacity for people to be able to understand what's happening with FOIA, to see who the conflict officers, but the key thing, the feature enable people to do this hasn't been built yet. And that's, I think, partially an issue of their client, the Department of Justice, acting on it. And there's also, I think, a key context with respect to the, differences in FOIA at each one of the agencies, where there might be some kind of specific software or practice that's been built up there. And creating software to push something directly into all these different systems and all these different procedures, that's actually a pretty big lift. It's not so much a technical issue, but maybe a cultural or administrative one. To really step back and build something for the entire government to use, which might be the best opportunity, will cost more, right? So DOJ will have to spend more money on that. And it also might face, frankly, some resistance from all the different government technology vendors that currently supply FOIA software to the different agencies.
All right, we'll keep on top of this from Washington as well. Alexander Howard, Senior Editor for Technology and Society at the Huffington Post out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. Thanks again, Alex.
My pleasure.